The rain hammered against the windows of the old bookstore like it was trying to break in and steal secrets. I was soaked, desperate, and 27 years old with a dating life that felt like a war I kept losing. Her name was Elena. We'd met at a rooftop party 2 nights earlier, and I'd done what I always did, asked questions. What do you do for work? Where are you from originally? What's your favorite movie? She'd answered politely, smiled that polite smile, and then vanished into the crowd like smoke. I replayed it in my head on loop, hating every word I'd spoken. Questions were safe. Questions were what nice guys used. Questions got me nowhere. That night, I ducked into the dusty shop on a side street in Florence. Yeah, I was there for work, some tech conference that didn't matter. And the owner, an old man with eyes like chipped marble, handed me a thin leather-bound volume from a locked cabinet. "Not for tourists," he muttered. "This one chooses its reader." The cover had no title, just a faded crest, and the year 1518. Inside, the handwriting was sharp, almost angry. Niccolò Machiavelli's lost manuscript on the art of conversation, not with princes, with women. I laughed at first. Machiavelli? The guy who wrote about crushing enemies and ruling by fear? What did he know about women? But I paid the ridiculous price anyway and read it under the flickering bulb of my hotel room while the rain kept pounding. By page 3, I wasn't laughing anymore. The first line hit like a slap. A man who asks questions of a woman admits he does not already possess the answers, and once she sees that emptiness, she will never again fear you. No chapters, no bullet points, just raw, ruthless truth wrapped in stories from his own life and the courts of Italy. I read until dawn, and when I finally closed the book, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would never ask another question again. Let me take you back to the night it began for real. I saw her across the crowded Piazza Cafe the next evening. Same Elena. She was sitting alone with a glass of red wine, scrolling her phone, the kind of woman who made the whole square feel like it was performing for her. Dark hair, sharper eyes, the kind of posture that said she'd already heard every line in every language. My old self would have walked over, smiled nervously, and started firing questions like a nervous interviewer. Instead, I remembered the manuscript's first command: enter as a storm, not a beggar. I walked straight to her table, pulled out the chair opposite without waiting for permission, and sat down. She looked up, surprised. Good. Surprise was the first crack. "You're thinking about the man who left you last month," I said, voice low, certain. Not a question, a statement. "He wore expensive shoes and cheap promises. You keep checking your phone because part of you still hopes he'll text something that doesn't disappoint you." Her fingers froze on the screen. For 3 full seconds, she just stared. Then she laughed, one short, startled sound. "Excuse me?" I didn't smile. Smiling too soon is weakness. You don't want another man who asks what you do for a living. You want a man who already knows what you're worth and tells you what he's going to do about it. I leaned in slightly, the way the manuscript taught, close enough to feel the heat of her, but not so close she could retreat. "Tonight, you're going to let me buy you another glass of this wine, not because you need it, because I've decided the evening tastes better when you're drinking it with me." She tilted her head, studying me like I was a painting that had suddenly moving. No questions from me, no, "Is this seat taken?" No, "Mind if I join you?" Just declaration, power, the exact opposite of everything I'd ever been taught about respectful conversation. And it worked. She set her phone face down. "You're either insane or the most interesting person I've met in months. Insane would be boring. Interesting is what I do on purpose." Then I launched into a story, not about me, not bragging, but a story that painted a world where I was the center without needing her validation. I told her about the time I stood on the roof of a burning building in a small Italian village during a wildfire, True story, actually, and how the flames taught me that fear is just a woman who hasn't been properly led yet. I described the heat on my face, the way the sky turned orange, the moment I realized panic is a choice weaker men make. I never once asked her opinion. I simply gave her the experience, let the words wrap around her like the smoke from that fire. She listened, really listened. Her wine glass stayed in her hand, but she forgot to drink. When I finished, she leaned forward, eyes bright. "Tell me what happened next." I almost smiled then. Almost. Instead, I raised one finger. "Later. First, we're leaving this cafe. The air here is too full of other people's small talk. You and I are going somewhere the night can actually breathe." I stood up, offered my hand, not as a question, but as an order disguised as chivalry. She took it. That was night one. The manuscript didn't stop at the first meeting. It went deeper, page after page, like Machiavelli himself was whispering in my ear across 5 centuries. "Women are not puzzles to be solved with questions," he wrote. "They are kingdoms to be claimed with vision. Speak as though the future already belongs to you, and she will rush to stand inside it." Over the next few weeks, I tested it like a scientist testing poison on kings. There was Sophia, the architect who designed skyscrapers and destroyed men with a single raised eyebrow. My old self would have asked, "What inspired your latest project?" Instead, I told her, while we stood on a bridge at midnight, "Your buildings are too honest. They reach for the sky like they're apologizing for wanting it. Next time you design one, make it arrogant. Make it look down on the city the way you look down on men who beg for your attention." She laughed so hard she had to hold the railing. Then she kissed me right there, no hesitation, because I had given her a new way to see herself instead of fishing for her story. There was Isabella, the surgeon who operated on hearts for a living and guarded her own like it was Fort Knox. I met her at a gallery opening. "No, what kind of doctor are you?" "No, do you like this painting?" I simply stood beside her in front of a dark canvas and said, "This artist is lying. He paints chaos, but he's terrified of it. You, on the other hand, cut open chests every day and never flinch. That's the kind of honesty the world needs more of." She turned to me, scalpel-sharp eyes softening. Within an hour, she was telling me things she'd never told her ex-husband. Because I hadn't asked, I had declared the truth about her, and she handed me the rest like tribute. Each time the pattern repeated. The moment I stopped asking, they started offering. The moment I stopped seeking permission with questions, they started seeking my approval with stories of their own. It was addictive, it was dangerous, and it was pure Machiavelli. But power like this always comes with a test. Her name was Valeria. She wasn't just beautiful, she was dangerous, the kind of woman who ran boardrooms the way generals run wars. We met at a private dinner in a villa outside Florence, the kind of event where the guest list is smaller than the wine list. Everyone there was somebody. Valeria was the somebody. She had the kind of presence that made silence feel like applause. My instinct screamed to ask her something safe, anything, but the manuscript was in my blood now. I waited until the table conversation lulled, then I looked straight at her across the candlelight and said, "You've spent your life making men feel small so they wouldn't notice how lonely the top actually is. Tonight, you're not going to do that with me. Tonight, you're going to let me show you what it feels like when someone looks at you and doesn't blink." The entire table went quiet. Someone dropped a fork. Valeria's lips parted just slightly. For the first time in any of these encounters, I saw the flicker of real resistance. She was used to being the one who decided the rules. "You presume a lot," she said, voice like velvet over steel. "I don't presume, I decide. And right now, I've decided that the rest of this dinner is irrelevant. You and I are going to walk out to the terrace, and I'm going to tell you exactly how this night ends." I stood up, didn't wait, didn't ask if she was coming. She followed. On the terrace, the hills rolled away under moonlight like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. I didn't touch her. I simply began to speak. Stories, visions, commands wrapped in poetry. I told her about the prince who conquered not by sword, but by making the enemy's queen want him more than her own crown. I described futures where her empire and my ambition collided in ways that would rewrite the rules of both. I painted pictures so vivid she could see them, and never once did I ask her what she thought, what she wanted, where this was going. She tried to test me. "Why do you think you can speak to me this way?" I smiled then, slow, certain. "Because you've already decided I'm right. Your body leaned forward when I stood up. Your pulse is visible in your throat. You're not listening to me because you have to. You're listening because for once someone isn't begging to know you. They're telling you who you're allowed to become tonight." She kissed me like the world was ending, and she wanted to take me with her. But here's where the story turns sharp. Valeria wasn't just a conquest, she was connected in ways that pulled me into a world I wasn't ready for. Old families, old money, old vendettas that still tasted like Renaissance blood. 3 days later, she invited me to a private gathering at a palazzo that had once belonged to the Medici. The guest list included politicians, artists, and one man who looked at me like I was already dead. Her former lover, a man named Lorenzo.
I tested that too. Months later, after Valeria and I had built something that felt unbreakable, late nights planning futures, travels across continents, nights where conversation flowed like wine because I never once weakened it with interrogation, I slipped. We were standing on a balcony in Capri, watching the sea argue with the cliffs. She was quiet, distant. My old instincts kicked in. "What's wrong?" I asked. The words were out before I could stop them. One simple question. She turned to me slowly, and I saw it. The flicker. The same flicker I used to see in every woman I lost, the moment the power shifted back to her. "Nothing," she said, but the word was a door closing. That night she was polite, distant. The next morning she left for a meeting in Milan and didn't text. For 3 days the silence was louder than any argument. I felt the manuscript's warning like a knife between my ribs. I had broken the rule. I had asked. So I did the only thing a man who has read Machiavelli would do. I flew to Milan uninvited. I found the hotel where her meeting was being held. I waited in the lobby like a shadow. When she walked out at 8 o'clock that evening, surrounded by executives, I stepped directly into her path. No apology, no question. "You're angry because I slipped," I said. "You're wondering if the man who commanded your attention was just an act. He wasn't. And tonight I'm going to remind you exactly who I am." I took her hand, same way I had that first night, and walked her out of the hotel without waiting for her answer. We ended up in a small trattoria with no English menu. I ordered for both of us. I told her stories about the man I was becoming, the empire we would build together, the way her ambition and mine would set fire to every room we entered. I spoke for 2 straight hours, no questions, only vision. By the time the tiramisu arrived, she was laughing again. By the time we reached her hotel room, she was the one asking, begging really, for me to never stop speaking to her that way. The lesson burned itself into my bones that night. The rule isn't just for the beginning, it's forever. Questions are cracks in the foundation. Certainty is the palace you build on top of them. I've lived by it ever since. Now you're sitting there, maybe in your car, maybe on your couch, maybe late at night with headphones in, wondering if this could work for you. Maybe you've spent years asking women every safe, polite question in the book and watching them drift away. Maybe you're tired of being the nice guy who finishes last in conversations that never catch fire. The manuscript is still with me. Its pages are worn now, but the words haven't faded. And every time I open it, I hear Machiavelli's voice, dry and certain.
Speak as though the throne is already yours. She will either kneel or she will flee, but she will never ignore you again. The rain has stopped outside my window now. The city is quiet. Somewhere out there is a woman you haven't met yet. She's waiting for a man who doesn't need to ask what she wants because he's already decided what they're going to become together. The choice is yours, but if you take nothing else from this long night I've just shared with you, take this. Stop asking. Start declaring. The world and every woman in it has been waiting for a man brave enough to speak without permission. And when you finally do it, when the words leave your mouth and her eyes light up like she's seeing the future for the first time, you'll understand why Machiavelli never needed to write a book about love. He only needed to write about power. And conversation, my friend, is the most dangerous power of all. The end? No. This is only the beginning of every conversation you'll ever have from this moment forward. Go use it. The women of the world have been waiting for a man who finally understands the rules. And now you do. The candle in my hotel room had burned low again, the same way it had the night I first cracked open that hidden manuscript. Rain no longer battered the windows of Florence. This time the air was still, heavy with the scent of cypress and old stone. But my mind was racing louder than any storm. The no questions rule had already changed everything. Elena, Sophia, Isabella, Valeria, each one had bent toward me because I spoke as a conqueror, not a petitioner. Yet the old Florentine wasn't finished with me. On the very last pages, after the warning about never asking again, there was a loose sheet tucked in, edges frayed as if it had been added in secret. The handwriting was the same, sharp, impatient, almost amused. Other tactics, it began, because holding a woman is not unlike holding a city. One siege may take the walls, but only many arts keep the gates from closing behind you. I smiled in the dim light. Machiavelli, the master of princes, had written a private codex on women, too. Not romance, not courtship, pure, calculated power translated into flesh and desire. I read deep into the night, and what I found wasn't gentle advice. It was an arsenal, ruthless, effective, and dangerously addictive. Let me pull you deeper into this world the way he pulled me. No dry lists, no safe summaries, just the raw stories of how these tactics played out in blood, silk, and moonlight, and how they can reshape every encounter you'll ever have. It started with the night I met Bianca. She was a painter's muse in a hidden studio off Via dei Calzaioli, the kind of woman whose laugh made lesser men write bad poetry. My old self would have complimented her work, asked about her inspirations, tried to bond over shared creativity. Instead, after the no questions foundation was set, I deployed the first hidden tactic from the manuscript, scarcity as a weapon. I arrived late to the gathering where she was holding court. I stayed only long enough to deliver one vivid story about a man who once walked away from a queen because her crown no longer excited him. Then I excused myself with a simple declaration. The night grows boring when the same voices repeat. I have better uses for my time. I left without looking back. No, can I see you again? No number exchanged. 3 days later, she found me. She had asked mutual friends where the mysterious storyteller had gone. When she appeared at the cafe I favored, I didn't act surprised or flattered. I simply said, "You came because absence sharpens hunger more than presence ever could. Good. Sit. Tonight I decide how long the meal lasts." She stayed until closing. Scarcity had done what constant availability never could. It made her chase the frame I controlled. Machiavelli's note on this was blunt.
Fortune is a woman, and she yields to the bold who do not linger like beggars at her door. Give too much of yourself, and she scatters you like leaves. Withdraw, and she pursues. I tested it again with a woman named Francesca, a merchant's daughter with a tongue like a whip. She was used to men orbiting her wealth and wit. After our first charged conversation, pure declaration, no questions, I vanished for a full week. No messages, no accidental sightings. When I reappeared at a banquet, I treated her as if the week had been nothing. "You look rested," I told her. "Absence suits you. It gives a man time to decide whether the fire is worth feeding." She pulled me aside later, eyes flashing. "Where did you go?" Not a demand for explanation from me, just her offering curiosity as tribute. I answered with another story, painting a future where a woman like her could either rule beside a king or watch him ride away. The scarcity made every word heavier. She leaned in closer because the silence I'd created had left a vacuum only my voice could fill.
The manuscript warned, though, scarcity without presence is just abandonment. It must alternate like a general's feints, advance, withdraw, advance harder. Too much withdrawal and she fortifies her walls. The art is in the timing. Then came the second tactic, one that felt like pure Renaissance poison wrapped in velvet. Controlled ruthlessness disguised as protection. Machiavelli had watched too many princes fall because they were kind when they should have been steel. In seduction, the same truth holds. Women test for weakness the way invaders test city gates. Show softness too early, and the test never ends. I met Julia at a private salon where intellectuals debated politics like it was sport. She was sharp, ambitious, the kind who could dismantle a man's ego with one raised eyebrow. After establishing the no-questions dominance, she tried the classic probe. She flirted with another man right in front of me, laughing louder than necessary, touching his arm. My old instincts would have sulked or asked what she was doing. Instead, I waited until the moment was perfect, then cut in with calm certainty. "You're testing whether I'll fight for what I've claimed. Cute. But remember this. Weak men beg for loyalty. Strong ones make disloyalty too costly to consider." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cause a scene. I simply turned to the other man and said, "Enjoy the conversation while it lasts. Her attention has a new owner tonight." Then I took Julia's hand and led her away without asking permission. She protested at first, half angry, half thrilled. Later, in the quiet of a carriage, she admitted the truth. "Most men would have whined or pretended not to care. You made me feel protected by the very danger in you." The manuscript called this the beatings fortune requires. Not literal violence, but the willingness to be ruthless when the moment demands it. Show her you can crush threats, rival suitors, her own games, even her doubts without hesitation, and she relaxes into your command. Ruthlessness, used sparingly and strategically, becomes the ultimate safety. She knows you won't hesitate to defend what's yours. I refined it with Laura, who loved to create drama. One evening, she manufactured a petty argument to see if I'd chase her approval. I didn't. I looked at her coolly and declared, "Chaos is for boys who have nothing better to build. If you want storms, find a weaker man. If you want a kingdom, stand still and let me speak." Then I launched into a vision of the two of us traveling to Venice, where her fire would fuel greater things than silly fights. She melted. The ruthlessness had drawn a line. The vision pulled her across it. Machiavelli's letters revealed he lived this himself. He juggled affairs with actresses and courtesans while maintaining a marriage, never letting any one woman become his entire world. He understood that a man divided by too many loyalties is weak, but a man who controls the flow of his own desire holds the reins. The third tactic cut even deeper, the illusion of inevitability. Never beg, never negotiate, make the outcome feel fated. With Caterina, a noblewoman whose family still carried Medici blood, I used this like a blade. After the initial conquest through stories and scarcity, she began pulling back, testing if I would pursue. I did the opposite. I sent no word.
When we crossed paths at the opera, I greeted her as if nothing had changed. "You've been thinking about the future I described," I said flatly. "It's already written. The only question is how gracefully you step into it." She laughed, but her eyes betrayed her. "You assume too much." "I assume nothing," I replied. "I observe. Your pulse quickens when I speak of power. Your body turns toward me even when your words resist. The seduction is already complete. We're only deciding the pace." That night, she didn't resist. The illusion that resistance was futile, that the story had already been told by a stronger narrator, disarmed her completely. Machiavelli had used the same principle in politics. Make your enemies believe defeat is destiny, and half the battle is won before swords are drawn. In the bedroom and the ballroom, it works even better. He illustrated it in his play, La Mandragola, that scandalous comedy where the seducer doesn't win the married woman through charm or honesty. He uses trickery, allies, a fake medical scheme involving a mandrake root that supposedly cures infertility but kills the first man to sleep with her. The husband is convinced to let another man, the seducer in disguise, take the risk. Deception layered on deception, all to make the conquest feel like clever fate rather than brute force. The audience laughed because they recognized the truth. People surrender faster when they believe the outcome was inevitable anyway. I never resorted to outright lies like the play's plot, but the spirit was the same. Paint the future so vividly, remove all paths except the one you control, and she walks it willingly. There were more tactics, each more potent than the last. Emotional contrast, the manuscript called it the river and the drought. Be warm and commanding one night, then distant and thoughtful the next, never predictable. The highs feel higher because of the lows you create. With one woman, I went from intense storytelling under starlight to cool detachment the following evening. She spent the day wondering what she'd done wrong, only to be rewarded with renewed fire when I chose. The contrast made her addicted to my moods because they dictated hers. Allies and infrastructure. Machiavelli never conquered alone. He used friends, rumors, shared acquaintances. In seduction, plant seeds with her circle. Let them speak well of you when you're not there. Let them whisper that you're dangerous, magnetic, the kind of man who changes women. When she hears it from others, your declarations carry triple the weight. The refusal to need, the deadliest of all. Never let her see you crave her validation. Machiavelli wrote that love is a chain easily broken when self-interest calls, but fear and respect endure. Translate that. Make her believe you could walk away at any moment without collapsing. That freedom makes her desperate to keep you close. I practiced it by always having other kingdoms to rule, my work, my ambitions, my stories that didn't revolve around her. The less I seemed to need her emotionally, the more she offered. One final night in Florence tested everything I'd learned. Valeria returned, this time with old flames circling like wolves. Lorenzo was back, whispering that I was just another passing amusement. Instead of defending myself with questions or explanations, I gathered a small group at a villa and told a single sweeping story about a prince who tamed fortune herself by never apologizing for his nature. I looked at Valeria the entire time. Some women fight the current, others learn to ride the man who commands the river. I didn't address Lorenzo directly. I didn't ask Valeria whose side she was on. I simply lived the tactics, scarcity in my attention to others, ruthlessness in ignoring weak challenges, inevitability in the future I painted. By midnight, she had sent Lorenzo away with a cool word and pulled me into the garden. "You're dangerous," she whispered. "No," I said. "I'm inevitable." The manuscript's final lines on these other tactics were simple and merciless. A man who masters only words might win a night. A man who masters presence, absence, steel, and fate wins the woman and keeps her wondering how she ever lived without his command. I closed the book that night, feeling the weight of centuries on my shoulders. Machiavelli hadn't written for nice boys hoping to be liked. He wrote for those willing to see human nature clearly, fickle, hungry, responsive to power more than poetry.
You're still here, listening as the story unfolds. Maybe you've tried being the good listener, the endless questioner, the safe choice, and maybe, like me that first rainy night, you're ready to burn the old rules. Start with no questions, layer on scarcity, disappear strategically and return stronger. Add the steel of controlled ruthlessness when tests come. Make every interaction feel like destiny you authored. Alternate warmth and distance like a general commanding seasons. Never need her more than she needs the world you describe. Do this consistently, and conversations stop being negotiations, they become coronations. The rain may return to Florence one day, but the tactics never fade. They're older than the city itself. Women have been responding to them since princes first learned that fortune yields to the bold. The only question left is if you're bold enough to use them. But remember the warning that never left the pages. Wield this power carelessly, and it turns on the wielder. Master it with vision, and the kingdoms, hers and yours, become one. Now go. The night is young somewhere, and a woman is waiting for a man who no longer asks. She's waiting for you to tell her how it ends. The candle had guttered out hours ago, but the old manuscript still lay on the scarred wooden table like a living thing. Florence slept beyond the shutters, yet inside that dim room the voice of Niccolo Machiavelli refused to stay silent. I had already absorbed the no questions rule, the scarcity feints, the controlled ruthlessness, the illusion of inevitability. They worked. They turned conversations into conquests and nights into kingdoms. But the loose final sheet, the one with edges darker than the rest, carried a deeper revelation. It wasn't titled. It didn't need to be. In tight, furious script, it drew the straight, merciless line between ruling a principality and ruling a woman. Politics and seduction are not cousins, it read. They are the same war fought on different ground. The prince who masters one without seeing the other is only half a man. I leaned back, heart beating slower now, the way it does when truth settles into bone. Every tactic I had used on Elena, Sophia, Valeria, had its exact mirror in The Prince.
Translate that to the Piazza Cafe where I first sat down with Elena without asking permission. My old self would have approached cautiously, testing the waters with questions, hoping fortune, or she, would smile on me. Instead, I declared the evening mine. I spoke as if the outcome was already written in my favor. I didn't beg for her attention. I seized the frame the way a prince seizes a weak city before rivals can reinforce it. The manuscript noted, "Fortune shows her power where there has been no preparation to resist her. A hesitant man leaves gaps. A decisive man builds dikes and dams in advance through story, vision, certainty, so that when the flood of her tests comes, the current breaks against his will instead of washing him away. Valeria tested me exactly like fortune tests a new ruler. She flirted with Lorenzo in front of me, creating chaos to see if I would crumble or adapt. I didn't negotiate. I didn't ask why. I redrew the map of the night with ruthless calm and declared her attention mine. She followed because fortune and women who embody that restless energy respect the man who refuses to be swept along. She loves the audacious more than the careful. Machiavelli observed that half our actions are ruled by fortune, the other half by our own virtu. In seduction, the ratio is the same. Half is her mood, her whims, the unpredictable river of desire. The other half is how boldly you dam that river and redirect its flow toward the future you describe. Appearances matter more than virtue. A prince must seem merciful, faithful, humane, upright, and religious, and yet be ready to act against all these when necessary. Men judge more by the eyes than by the hands, because everyone can see, but few can feel. This is why my stories worked so powerfully. I never claimed to be kind or safe. I painted myself as the storm, the fire on the rooftop, the man who looked down on cities the way Valeria looked down on weak suitors. People and women believe what they see in bold relief far more than what they hear in careful explanations.
When I told Katerina, the artist, that her buildings were too apologetic, I wasn't being honest in the modern vulnerable sense. I was shaping her self-image with a single vivid stroke, the way a prince shapes public perception with one decisive act. She didn't need to verify my character. She saw the audacity, and that vision was stronger than any list of my good qualities. Machiavelli warns that a prince who is always good will come to ruin among those who are not. In the game of attraction, the man who is always nice, always available, always asking, "What do you think?" will be devoured by her shifting moods or outmaneuvered by bolder rivals. The effective seducer appears strong, decisive, and slightly dangerous, even when he must occasionally bend. Fear and love. Better to be feared if you cannot be both. Love is preserved by a link of obligation, which, because men are wicked, is broken at every opportunity for their advantage. Fear, however, is maintained by a dread of punishment that never passes. In romantic terms, this doesn't mean cruelty for its own sake. It means never letting her feel that your presence is optional or that your frame can be casually challenged without cost. With Julia, when she manufactured drama to test my investment, I didn't chase her approval or plead for peace. I declared chaos beneath us and offered a higher vision instead. The subtle punishment was my temporary emotional distance, the withdrawal of the fire she had come to crave. Fear here is not terror. It is the healthy awareness that disappointing the man who commands the narrative carries a price, the sudden cooling of the world he created for her. Lorenzo tried to reassert himself with whispers and old connections. I didn't counter with arguments or jealousy. I simply made continued association with him feel small and irrelevant compared to the empire I described with Valeria. She chose the side that felt stronger, because humans, and especially the feminine expression of fortune, naturally gravitate toward the pole of greater power. The ends justify the means, and deception is a tool. In La Mandragola, Machiavelli's own scandalous comedy, the seducer Callimaco doesn't win the virtuous Lucrezia with poetry or sincerity. He uses layered deception, a fake doctor, a mandrake root cure for infertility that conveniently requires another man to sleep with her first, a corrupt friar bribed with money and promises. The husband is tricked into facilitating his own cuckolding. Everyone gets what they want in the end, and the deception is forgiven because the outcome serves desire. The parallel is brutal but effective. Pure honesty is rarely the shortest path when resistance exists. The skilled operator creates situations where her yes feels natural, even inevitable, rather than a direct surrender. I never lied outright, but I shaped reality the same way. When scarcity was needed, I disappeared not out of gamesmanship alone, but because presence diluted impact. When inevitability was required, I spoke of futures as already decided facts. The means were stories, timing, controlled absence, vivid painting of alternate realities. The end was her walking willingly into the world I authored. Machiavelli understood that most people prefer comfortable illusions to harsh truths. A woman besieged by boring, safe, question-asking men will often welcome the man who offers a more exciting narrative, even if that narrative demands she step outside her usual caution. Adaptability and the lion and the fox. A prince must know how to use the nature of the beast, the lion for strength and the fox for cunning. Pure force invites rebellion. Pure trickery eventually exposes itself. The master switches between them as circumstances demand. In practice, this meant alternating warmth and steel, presence and scarcity, grand vision and quiet command. With Isabella, the surgeon, I was the bold storyteller who saw her hidden strength. When she tested boundaries later, I became the fox, redirecting without direct confrontation, making resistance feel pointless rather than crushing it openly. The prince who is only a lion gets isolated. The one who is only a fox gets despised when the tricks are seen through.
The master who masters both keeps her fascinated because she never fully predicts the next move, yet always feels the underlying strength. One final parallel that cuts deepest. Machiavelli admired certain strong women in history, like Caterina Sforza, who defied captors by exposing herself and declaring she could make more children, precisely because they displayed virtù that transcended the womanly weakness he attributed to fortune in general. He didn't hate women, he saw human nature clearly, and in his time, that nature assigned women the role of the changeable force that must be mastered or allied with through superior will. The manuscript's closing reflection was stark. The prince who treats fortune as a weak thing to be gently persuaded will lose his state. The lover who treats a woman as a puzzle to be solved with questions and kindness will lose her attention. Both must be claimed with the same clear eye. See what she is, not what you wish her to be. Then act. I closed the book that night with the weight of centuries pressing down on me. Every political lesson in The Prince had found its echo in the bedrooms and piazzas of my own life. No questions declaration mirrored the prince's decisive action. Scarcity echoed the controlled use of fear and reward. Ruthlessness, when tested, reflected the necessity of steel. The illusion of inevitability was pure virtù, bending fortune to one's will. You've followed this far, through rainy Florence nights, through conquests and warnings, through the raw mechanics of power translated from thrones to desire. Perhaps you're beginning to feel the shift inside yourself, the old habit of asking, seeking, hoping quietly, giving way to something sharper, hotter, more certain. The parallels are not accidents. Machiavelli didn't write separate manuals because he understood one truth underlies both domains. Human beings respond to strength, vision, and the credible promise of a better ordered world, whether that world is a stable principality or a night and a life spent beside a man who never relinquishes the frame. Fortune is still a woman. She still favors the bold. And somewhere right now, in a crowded room or a quiet street or a late-night conversation yet to begin, she is waiting to see whether you will approach her with the timid caution of the cautious prince or with the impetuous command of the one who has read the manuscript and decided the story belongs to him. The choice, as always, is yours to declare, not to ask. Go make the parallel real.